like to give us a little insight.
If you look at it, that referendum that we had in 2016 was an extraordinary event. It was a referendum, it was a choice that the political establishment never wanted to give to the British people, but in the end, Cameron was forced to. I think the truth of it is, I put so much salt on their tails, they were absolutely terrified of me. The only way of getting rid of the threat of this awful Farage and this UKIP party was to say, let's neutralise the issue, we'll give a referendum. And I think Cameron thought that by doing that, he'd get rid of me and the issue would actually die, because only a small minority of people would be stupid enough to think that we could govern our own country and make our own friends in the world. And of course, the amazing thing was that as soon as he made that, it was 6 years ago, last week, that Cameron made the famous Bloomberg speech, when he said, if I get a majority government, there'll be a referendum. And a funny thing happened. The more people started debating this issue, the more people's eyes were being opened to what the European project really was, and the more it became possible that, horror of horrors, in a referendum we could vote to leave. So I think the level of shock in the UK establishment was absolutely massive. I think it was massive too in the global establishment. There's a fellow sitting in the White House who firmly believes that he would not have been elected as president of the USA if it hadn't been for Brexit.
Does President Trump acknowledge that, does he?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah, he does.
Oh,
yeah.
very much so. Yeah. I mean, that was why during his campaign, I was on stage with him in Mississippi. I was going around for sort of weeks before the election all around America, going around TV studios saying, look, you know, Brexit is the beginning of a big change in global politics. And I think a lot of people that went out and voted for Trump did so because they kind of thought, well, if the Brits can do it, maybe we can do it. I mean, really interesting. But where we are now is we are 2.5 years on from the Brexit vote. And we have a Houses of Parliament who, despite the fact we voted to leave by a very clear margin, despite the fact that a year later, in a general election, both the big parties promised us they would deliver on the result, and despite the fact that 498 MPs voted to trigger Article 50, which made it perfectly clear.
And legal.
Legal in every sense, and 2 years in which to negotiate a settlement or to just leave. And here we are now 60 days away from that date, and they are doing everything they can to stop Brexit, to dilute Brexit, to kick the can down the road, to force a second referendum. And I can't think of any comparison in our democratic history where Parliament is so clearly against the will of the people. It's shocking.
Yeah. But also, could I just say that, as I'm in the media, don't you think the media is very biased to Remain rather than...
Oh, I think enormously. I mean, it's...
Well, that's got to fuel the fire with...
It doesn't help. The BBC is extraordinary. You know, everything's despite Brexit. Unemployment figures today were good, despite Brexit. The sun's going to shine tomorrow, despite Brexit. I mean, there is this constant negative narrative. And if you watch TV debate programmes, you know, you will normally see 4 Remainers against 1 Leaver.
Yeah, you do.
That's about what you see.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, Nigel, that I've actually seen recently, probably the last 2 weeks, a little bit more about those who wanted to leave. There seemed more, they did that poll up in Leeds, wasn't it?
Fascinating.
Yeah, that was great.
That was, so Sky
Even
News...
those who wanted to remain still said, look, let's just leave and get on with it. That's the way it is.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think the Leave vote is now coalescing around the idea of we just go. Whatever terms we can or can't agree, we just go, because that's the only way of honouring the result. Now, Project Fear, of course, is in full cry. I mean, the latest one is they might have to introduce martial law.
That's again...
if we leave with no deal. Well, I'm going to suggest they might have to introduce martial law if we don't leave at all. So angry with millions... No, I'm not encouraging street violence, and in fact, one of the...
absolutely not.
You know,
it's not very British, though.
Well, it's...
French, maybe?
I'm going to say it's what the French do, isn't it? And they're very good at it. Although, if you go back through British history, you know, we have had examples. I mean, you know, the poll tax riots in Trafalgar Square were an example where these things can happen. I don't want them to happen. I will say this. If Brexit gets delayed, or if Brexit gets thwarted, I will make sure that people have some democratic choices they can take as opposed to moving towards violence.
Yes.
Yeah,
well, after all, that's what we are, is a democracy, and we're seeing everything but that played out in Parliament,
Yes.
particularly.
Quite extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, we've got the longest continuous running Parliament in the world. All right, the Isle of Man's a bit longer, but you know, and we've got something here that was called the Mother of Parliaments. We were seen to be the nation that developed the whole concept of parliamentary democracy, and yet what's going on now is, you know, governments negotiate and parliaments approve or disapprove. That, for centuries, is how we've conducted ourselves on the world stage.
Started with the Charter of London, didn't it, in 1067?
Absolutely, and all the way through that period of time.
Yes.
You know, and what you've now got, for the first time since 1642, which triggered the English Civil War, we've now got people in Parliament trying to take power away from the executive, trying to take power away from the people, and bringing it to themselves. And I you know, unless this is thwarted, and unless we stop them from doing this, I actually quite fear for where we're going with our democracy. It's almost as if, and it's not just here, it's in America as well, it's almost as if the Brexit result, the Trump result, the new Italian government, it's almost as if the globalists are saying these are not legitimate results because the people who voted for it are too stupid to understand the consequences of their action. Now, you know, when you start to get people in senior positions in society actually condemning democracy as a process, that's pretty worrying.
Also undermining the people's intelligence. They seem to associate those who want to leave as being unintelligent, uninformed, and stupid.
We get that impression in Australia, actually. We're sitting back, looking in. They seem to be telling the general public, who's a very, very intelligent society, the British public, that you just don't understand. And that seems to be the common, you know, but we can explain it better as long as you vote to remain.
Actually, you know, I tell you what, though, the more they do that, the more actually the Leave vote galvanises, the stronger they become in this. And I will, on a sort of more optimistic note, I will say this. Whatever happens in the short term, and none of us know how this will play out, you know, are we going to leave on a rotten deal, or is it going to get kicked into the long grass? I mean, they are the two most likely options that I see right now. But I'll tell you something, whatever these politicians try to do to frustrate our will, ultimately we're going to win. Why? Because the genie is out of the bottle. And right across the Western world, people are saying, whoa, hang on, we're all for post-war international cooperation. We're all for friendship. We're all for sensible trade. We're all for reciprocity, peace, all of those things. But what's happened in the name of building this post-world order, with the European Union at the very epicenter of it, is they've built a new form of government where the people with the power aren't elected, can't be removed. It's power without any sense of accountability, and it's all backed up by a handful of giant multinational businesses who get involved with these super civil servants, produce a rule book, a regulatory book, that makes it almost impossible for the small man and woman to get into those industries and to compete. And that's what globalisation is.
Are you referring to the, like, EPA, the rules they're bringing in, as an example? If you want to open up a little restaurant, well, you can't, because you need £200,000 worth of equipment to meet with these regulations. Is that what you're suggesting?
Yes.
Pushing them out of the market.
At every level, we see this. And you know, the left say, oh, capitalism's failing. We haven't got capitalism. This is global corporatism.
It's crony capitalism, isn't it? That's what it is. I mean, if you look at you could go to the ECB and you could buy European Central Bank, and you could buy bonds at 0.25 of 1%, and you could take them to the US and leverage them and buy US bonds and get a 2.5% return on those same bonds, leverage them 10 times. It's crony capitalism. There is no thought. It's not. They're not actually producing anything no more, are they?
No, and it's also very interesting, isn't it, that this model that we've got with these global structures and these massive companies, also, the whole thing's backed up by debt. Now, I mean, what is extraordinary about this is, you know, 2008 was quite a scary moment for the West. I mean, a very scary moment. And all right, we came out the end of it, but, you know, a lot of people suffered for a lot of years. But if you fast forward 10 years to now, the levels of debt are, at all levels, corporate, national and personal, those levels of debt are far greater now than they were 10 years ago. And it also includes China, because China have decided they want to be like the West, they want to get into massive debt as well. So I do think...
Well, you've got China running at 300% of GDP currently.
Yep.
Based on their figures, you've got Japan, which is running at 250% of GDP, and we're talking about Greece. That was this big problem in Europe, and I think they were running at 176% of GDP. I'm not sure on that exactly.
About right.
Yeah, at that particular time when it's all started to unfold. If you look at it from a global perspective, you've got the global GDP is running at 300%. Which is ridiculous. So you're right.
No, I think there is
scary.
I think
this is without Brexit.
Well, of course, here's the danger, though. The danger is that we get the next economic downturn, and it's coming.
Exactly, because that's on my question for you,
it's coming.
Nigel.
It's coming. We know it's coming. And when the next economic downturn happens, we'll be told it's all because of Brexit, it's all because of Trump, and we must go back to Davos, where the great globalists have their week in the snow, and we must hand all our democratic powers over to these people. And this is the story all the way through.
In particular, the central banks, I would imagine.
Well, the central banks, of course, are part of that, but I mean, don't forget the role of the IMF and many of these other institutions as well. But always, economics is always used. Economic fear is always used to try and get us to give up our liberties, to give up our freedoms, to give up those things that our grandparents and great-grandparents sacrificed so much to defend. And this is absolutely at the heart of what this is all about. I believe in liberty. I believe the nation-state is the building block that we respect. It's the building block we pay our taxes to. It's the building block that, if necessary, we'll stand up and fight for and defend. And the idea that Mr. Juncker, and a bunch of unelected people in Brussels can design a new flag and say, this is now your identity. I mean, it's just for the birds. It isn't going to happen. It isn't working. And we're seeing this in Italy, in France and elsewhere. And this is not some extreme form of xenophobic nationalism, as they paint it out to be.
No.
It is a genuine belief. Just as you always put the interests of your own family first before the people next door, you put the interests of your country first, and you work in a spirit of open cooperation with your neighbours. And I think, actually, what I'm advocating is a return to normality.
Can I come back to it? Because it's interesting, the night of 2016 when the result came through, I was shocked. We were all shocked, because we thought we'd go to bed, we'd lost, as far as wanting to come out of the EU. And when the result came in, and my wife and I woke up in bed about whatever it was, 4 or 5 o'clock.
About 4 o'clock-ish, yeah.
Oh, no, do you know, I nearly swore. A pleasant word, not very rude, but I swore and said, do you know what, we're now going to get the blame for all the financial problems that are going to come. They were on their way anyway.
Yes.
Okay, so 2008 is going to repeat itself, sadly, because of the debt and everything else. But this is what has been put forward in the last few weeks, big time in the media, is that the ordinary man in the street, you're going to lose. You're going to lose your jobs. You're financially going to be worse off because of Brexit.
Yes.
Really. When in actual fact, what are the facts that you know of, Nigel, like the IMF and everything else, which the big boys at the top know we're heading for a crash anyway, and they would like to palm that off to the Brexiteers?
Yeah, I mean, look, we've actually had, if you think about it, most countries have had 9 years or so of continuous growth. Ever since that shock, we've seen stock markets rebound in the most extraordinary way, people's pensions looking really quite rosy. And so there's always a cycle, of course, isn't there? And throughout the history of man.
And this month's the longest expansion, isn't it?
It is. So it would be natural to expect downturns to come. I just worry that the reasons that caused the last crash are actually worse now in terms of debt.
They are.
And they are worse. So we are going to get another shock. And yes, they're going to blame, of course.
And through that blame, will they then ask for another referendum in, say, 2 years' time or 3 years' time, when right in the middle of a downturn?
Well, they might do, but the thing is this. There was a question that I asked during the referendum campaign. I said, if this was a referendum for us to vote to join the EU, would we vote to join it? Of course, no.
Right.
Absolutely not.
No.
It shows you the power of... When any referendum is called on any subject, the status quo is the most powerful position. because you have to convince people there's a reason to change the status quo. All of which makes the Brexit victory the more astonishing when I think about it and I look at it. But if in 2 or 3 years' time we're out of the European Union and the referendum is to
change the state,
it ain't going to happen.
No, right, that's
all right. Yeah. I mean, that's really the point. And that's why this battle that we're engaged in right at this moment in time is so fundamental. You know, what happens in the next 60 days is so important.
What about Airbus?
Speaking of the debt, when you brought up the debt, we had, what was the main cause in 2008? It was the collateralised debt.
Subprime mortgage. Oh, yeah.
Yes. Obligations, yeah. So, and now I think it's called naked credit default swaps, isn't it? Yeah. That's the new terminology. And basically what that is I can, as a commercial institution, I can give a loan to a company or another institution and you can bet on that they won't pay that loan, even though it's got nothing to do with you. You're not providing the loan, you're not receiving the loan, and you can bet on that I won't pay it and pay 1 or 2%. And this is the sort of gambling that's going on in the society with the pension funds and everything else.
Yes,
so how dare they bring that to Brexit?
Half of these products dreamt up by firms like Goldman Sachs.
Yes, JP Morgan and
who of course
who
actually see the European Union as basically the forerunner of global government.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what these people are pushing for. I mean, it's pretty clear who the enemy is, as far as I'm concerned.
And who is that?
Oh, the enemy are these giant multinational businesses who are prepared, in their own short and medium-term financial interests, to basically take down our democratic systems. Mm-hmm. And of course, they find plenty of willing accomplices, because there are plenty of people who will take these big jobs, take the salaries, take the lifestyle, take the pensions, but they've been rumbled.
It's not a bribe, really.
Yes, of course, but they've been rumbled. Mm-hmm. I think we, the great public, have begun to understand what's going on here.
Yes, the people are more informed today, ironically, because of media. But on the other hand, you've got what is truth.
Also,
free media.
Also, I was going to say this. Also, now this is important. You know, traditional mainstream media, if you look at television in particular, those numbers are falling every year.
Mm-hmm. Because
those numbers are falling every year because there are many more ways that we can now access.
Which is great, really, for the general public.
You know, I would never, ever have got off the ground effectively without YouTube. Yeah. It was my speeches in the European Parliament, as I like to call it, my helpful contributions.
They're brilliant.
in the European... But suddenly, I was able to get to a big audience on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. And who's the king of Twitter? Well, it's Donald Trump, isn't it? Mm-hmm. So, you know, and even as a supporter, occasionally I sort of have to peer through my fingers at...
We all do. But we have to respect the fact that he is a man who says he's going to do something and do it. And he's a businessman. After all, one of the things I have as a layman is looking at politicians and saying, well, where did you come from? What did you do in life to actually deserve to be where you are? What experience do you have in trying to pay the bills, make ends meet? Yes.
Well,
as a business or
as I've said to the European Parliament more than once, none of you have ever had a proper job in your lives, and they all start knowing me. But I don't think I'm wrong. You know?
No, but that's what we're all seeing, and that's why Donald Trump breaks the mould.
Big time.
People then, of course, try to attack him for the tax thing, and of course they're doing everything to change people's opinion. You know, then the average man in the street wants now a change, a big-time change, and likes the directness of Donald Trump.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. There's no messing. You know exactly what he thinks, and people like that. You know, I think there is a big. You sort of think back to the earlier part, perhaps, of this century, and we had sort of Blair in the UK, Schroeder in Germany, Clinton in America, and it was this kind of career politics. Everything had kind of merged in the middle. It was a sort of a big form of social democracy almost, heading towards increasing powers at a global level throughout the world. And I think we're now actually fighting back against that pretty hard. We actually want some personalities again. We want some real people. And the only victory the other side have had, really, since 2016 was Macron. Yeah. Macron was the golden boy, the globalist, the man who, on his first day as French president, played the European anthem and had the flags all over the stage.
Well, he's down to about 22% in his...
18 was the last I saw. 18. So so the good news is, if that's their fight back, overall, we're in a pretty good position.
Yeah. Do you think now this might be out of your vocabulary, but one world government, a lot of our viewers understand that the world will head towards a one world government and a new world order, whatever you want to call it.
It won't. It isn't going to happen. No. Well, I mean, this is the dream of Trotsky, isn't it? This is what Trotsky wanted 100 years ago, and it isn't practicable. It isn't reasonable. It could never be done on any democratic basis anyway.
It would have to be dictatorship.
Yes.
Public opinion, indeed public anger, had a big impact on those votes in the House of Commons yesterday, and with it we've seen a diminution of the risk of a second referendum. For now, the prospect of Article 50 being extended taken off the table. And when I hear speakers, despite the Spellman Amendment, saying today they're worried that the risk of a no deal has increased, you're right, it has. But not because of what happened last night in Westminster, but because of the response, gentlemen, we got from you this afternoon. You know, even when the Prime Minister actually gets a majority behind her. And all right, I accept she made a dreadful mistake by signing up to the backstop. You summoned her. At 4:15 in the morning, she left Downing Street. She went to meet the ultimatum that you'd set her. She signed up to something that has proved to be a disaster. She signed up to something that no country, unless it had been defeated in war, would have signed up to. We now realise that mistake, and actually, the House of Commons, the country, is overall looking for a deal. But you know something? Before the referendum, no one knew who the European Commission were. That Maoist Barroso was a complete unknown. You guys are now household names. And what we've seen is an appreciation in Britain that unelected bureaucrats in Brussels have been talking down to and humiliating the Prime Minister of our nation, and we don't like it. And even when she comes back, trying to be reasonable, saying let's renegotiate, you're not prepared to give an inch. The reason that a no-deal Brexit's got a little bit closer is because of the sheer language and attitude, not just from the Commission, but from many in the Parliament towards the United Kingdom. I think public opinion will be very, very angry that there is no give today from anybody in Brussels whatsoever. I think many will say we're simply dealing with fanatics who are not prepared to be reasonable and make any sense of compromise. And of course, Theresa May has made compromise after compromise, way too many compromises in my view. So I think we are beginning to think that the public will come to a view that no deal is better than the backstop, and that's a big problem. It's a big problem for all of you who want to get re-elected in a few weeks' time, because no deal means no 39 billion and your voters will be coughing up the money. No deal means the 100 million bottles of Prosecco we buy every year from Italy will become more expensive, as will 750,000 German cars. So why don't we all prepare sensibly for a no-deal scenario? Why don't we prepare to go to the World Trade Organization, use Article 24, so that we can, after we leave on March the 29th, have a 2-year period of no tariffs, no quotas, no restrictions of any kind, no problems or difficulties with Ireland whatsoever. Brexit will have been delivered. You will have protected for at least 2 years your voters. That, I think, ladies and gentlemen, right now is the only possible constructive way forward.
Hear, hear.
I can't agree any more, Howard. That was rousing, absolutely rousing.
Yes. It is amazing that we haven't had that somebody say that before, and it's taken Nigel Farage or a Nigel Farage to actually say what most of us are thinking, whether we're for Brexit or for remaining, because the humiliation of which Brussels has put us through and the way they've talked down to us and more or less stuffed us up with into this corner that we almost facing a no-deal Brexit. And to be honest, I would have him put in the same league as Churchill when there was a great time of trouble. needed a leader that wasn't going to just play politics. That was Churchill. And where we are today, somebody telling it straight how it is. We're not at war, but we are in words and in the way in which we have to get this deal settled one way or the other. I think it's going to take somebody like Nigel Farage to do it. So thank you, Nigel.